Hey there, and welcome back to 31 Days of Horror Movie Reviews. And today I checked out VHS Beyond. It is the new anthology horror release, and it was released exclusively, I believe, on Shudder. If you're not familiar, Shudder is a horror exclusive streaming service. So if that's something that you're interested in, that's all they have. They don't have anything else. It's just straight up horror, but it's a great resource if you're looking for some of those older horror movies from, like the 80s, the 70s, things that you may have missed. But they do get big name titles. It's not all sci-fi exclusives or something like that. It's legitimate, horror, but it's just that's all they house there. So I decided to check this out for a few reasons. VHS is a series, it's a franchise, a series of movies, but they're all horror anthologies. So each movie is different stories, and what ties them all together is that the premise is found footage VHS tapes that are then watched as part of the movie or shown to us as part of the overall movie. They are VHS quality, and they are, grainy, somewhat potato-like, but that's part of the appeal. That's part of the scare. This particular entry just came out, I believe, this month on October 4th in 2024, and I've actually been seeing quite a bit about this movie, mostly because I've mentioned in a few of my other films about Mike Flanagan, and he actually wrote one of the short films for VHS Beyond, and his wife, Katie Siegel, made her directorial debut directing the short story that he wrote. And so that already had me going like, okay, I'm going to add this to the list because let's get a Flanagan in here. I think anybody who's watched me, in any of these videos knows that he's definitely one of my favorites. And so I was definitely interested to check that out. And through watching it, I also discovered that Justin Long was also involved in VHS Beyond as a project. And the cool thing about that is I was unaware until I was actually watching the credits at the end. And if anybody is a fan or has seen the movie Tusk, which was directed by Kevin Smith, but it is a horror movie and it does star Justin Long, and it also features Haley Joel Osment as a grown adult in a movie. And it is fascinating. It is kind of darkly comedic, but it's also brilliant, and it is scary, and it has a very kind of bleak, outlook. And there is a story as part of VHS Beyond that, if you're watching it and you're familiar with Tusk, I think you would definitely get the same vibes from that. This particular movie, it included 6 stories, and it kind of jumps right into them. And the beyond part of this is that actually it's more alien, kind of abduction, alien activity oriented, as opposed to straight up horror concepts that we're all used to. However, I do have to say, as in general, I am not the hugest fan of mixing my sci-fi with my horror. I think there are incredibly impressive and wonderful examples of sci-fi horror. I mean, Event Horizon is wonderful. Alien is the same. However, I think it's just my own personal 2 cents. I kind of prefer those genres a little bit split, only because it's just sci-fi concepts and aliens and things like that. They don't necessarily appeal to me. Just story-wise, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with them, but I also don't gravitate towards sci-fi in general. But with that being said, I have to commend VHS Beyond for managing to do an extremely good job throughout all of the vignettes, despite the fact that they were all directed by different people and they were all written by different people, they were all acted by different actors. The only thing tying them together was this overarching theme. I have to say that honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I think they did a beautiful job of blending sci-fi and horror together into something that um, could be scary, thought provoking, and it didn't rely on a lot of the tropes in sci fi horror that I don't like. I think a really good example of the kind of sci fi horror that I don't like was the season of American Horror Story. Well, first it was American Horror Story Asylum, the section of the that season where it had to do with alien abductions and that like somebody thought somebody was a serial killer, but it turned out to be alien abductions. They lost the plot for me with that aspect. And then still once again going back to American Horror Story, they did the double feature season, and half of the season had to do with four people being abducted by aliens and then they're pregnant. And that whole section of it just seemed, it just lost, number one, it lost me. And it was too campy, too comedic. Um, for my thoughts on it, I think it was too campy to be scary. And I think part of that had to do with trying to make things space aged. Or a lot of times when you make things that are very technologically advanced, they have very clean lines, very clean senses. And a lot of that I think takes away from horror, because I think for people in general, horror a lot of times comes from the filthy, the dirty, the disgusting, the gross, the scary. Um, because it prickles on little fears in the background of like, oh no, I got a bad cut, like I cut myself on this rusty wire. And on one hand it's like, okay, yeah, blood is scary, that sucks, blood. But then you're like, oh, but wait, while I'm running away from this killer, like I might also get tetanus. um so like if I get cut on a rusty nail on my leg and I'm trying to run away, well, it might be getting infected and then it's going to hurt more. And there's just little things that feed into the roots in your brain while you're watching something that's horror related. And I think that adds a lot to the scares. And I think that's where sci-fi a lot of times deviates for me. um is really space kind of has that very like space themes or like alien themes has this very like clean white sterile, because those are the things we think about when we think science. And because you have to have like clean, sterile environments in order to do experiments, and experiments are how you reach out to these, grand celestial things. I also, on the other hand, too, I think that what we already know is here on Earth is scary enough, and what we don't know that's here on Earth is very scary. Like I think the ocean is terrifying because we've mapped like 1% of it in our existence, and we don't even know what's down there, and we'll like discover a new species, and it's horrifying. Like, oh, this fish lives on the bottom of the ocean floor, and it can survive in lava, and it only eats like newborn baby chicks from this remote island in Maui. And there's a series of weird events that get the baby chicks down. Like there's and you hear about these things and you're like, I don't, how does that even, how did, what, we don't know anything about this, and yet we're like, oh, let's go in space. And I'm like, no, there's scary things down here. So like I said, sci-fi is not usually my thing, but I think this anthology movie is has just really great pieces. There is almost seems like a typical zombie type entry, but it kind of turns things on its head at the end. Sometimes the villain reveals are a bit, campy, or they're not that great. But that's one of the cool things too about there being short stories that are all married into one movie, is that if one story is not that great, it doesn't bring the whole thing down. You can have one story that's not that great. You can have 3 stories that aren't that great, but when you have 6, if you have 3 great ones and 3 okay ones, and or three great ones or two great ones and, one real stinker. You have enough to still make an enjoyable, watchable movie experience. And I think also if you're going to be sitting down and watching movies with friends, I think this one would be fun because there's a little bit of something here for everybody. Um, and I also have to speak a little bit. All of it is found footage. So all of the different short films are all filmed from the watcher's perspective for a lot of it. And that leads to a lot of cool horror moments too. But I do have to say, in general, I am not a huge fan of the found footage genre, mostly because it's been done. And I think a lot of us who, kind of started not started, but you know what I mean? A lot of us who watched the early found footage entries, we're used to things like the Blair Witch Project and Cloverfield, where, yeah, they were pioneers and they were great movies and, they do have rewatchability, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like, I don't know, I started to get a headache about halfway through the movie, or, oh, it was really hard to watch and figure out what was, going on in this movie. And I think it says a lot about how far technology's come, and I think it says a lot about how far filmmaking has come, that now they're finding new and creative ways to do found footage where it's not just a shaky cam, that somebody's holding around, like carrying around, where you can't really tell what's going on and you can't really see things, or, it's making you nauseated, so you're missing part of the movie because you're, looking away from the screen. I did not experience any of that with this, so I think that's a plus. Obviously when a movie doesn't make you physically sick, that's always a plus. But I really loved one of the entries in this, having to do with parachuting, skydiving. And because it is something on my bucket list that I would like to do at some point. So it kind of was like, when it came up, I was like, oh great, there's a horror entry about this experience that's scary enough on its own, but now it's going to be like in the back of my head, I'm going to be like, oh crap, like, am I going to get abducted while I'm skydiving? you know? And I think that's entertaining. I think that's fun and funny, and I think the way that it was done was really creative. I think the way that they managed to justify found footage, or the way that they managed to kind of roll it into the story, that, the camera is part of it, the camera is necessary for things. I'm just kind of blown away by how everything worked together. At the end of it, I really expected that there would maybe be like one or two pretty good entries and then the rest of them would be pretty forgettable. But I have to say I was quite surprised, and pleasantly so, that every entry had its merits. Every entry had good acting, an interesting concept, a cool way of shooting it. That's the other thing too, is it's cool to see 6 different visions on how found footage can be, along with 6 different versions of a sort of like sci-fi-ish horror. Because I do have to say, at the end of this is a horror film. It's not I wouldn't call it a sci-fi film. I wouldn't even, and it's definitely a sci-fi horror film because there are those sci-fi elements in it. There are those alien elements or things like that, but it wasn't all just aliens. There was there are other things, and I don't want to spoil any of it. I don't even really want to get into talking a whole lot about each individual vignette, only because they are short films and there's very little I can tell you without spoiling something. And I think this is an enjoyable enough film for anybody who's interested in the genre. Basically, if you're watching my videos, I would assume you're either interested in horror, or you're really bored. But either way, I would give VHS Beyond 4 stars, which is way more than I expected. I was kind of expecting a 2-star max, especially since this is a later entry in a franchise. And a lot of times they just go downhill once they hit a certain point. And it's also really cool to see that there is a service out there. Shudder is producing these movies, but they are paying actors, directors, producers, writers that have notoriety in the business still at this point in the franchise. You know, they're not giving up and going like, oh, we're on entry number 83, hire Joe Schmo off the street and maybe he can make us a couple bucks on this entry. And I think it's indicative that we're at a point where people are really serious about horror. You know, horror is no longer the genre where actors and actresses' careers go to die. Horror is something that there are people who are just going into the industry to produce. And it's a lot of it's becoming more mainstream. Now, there are some downsides to that, where with things becoming more mainstream, they're becoming, in some respects, some of them less creative, less focused on making a good film and more focused on making money. That's the detriment when the large media becomes interested in anything. But I think, given what we have in horror, what we've received, the actors, the directors, the writers, the producers who come to the horror genre right now, I think are doing some really positive things. And I'm finding, at least this year, now I know I'm only 8 days into the month, but so far I have watched 6 really good movies and 2 bad ones. And that's better than I can say for last year. And last year, I think on my whole list of 31, I don't know if I could actually say there were any super great movies that I really enjoyed. Um, but there were certainly a lot more that I did not. Now, like I said, the month is young. We have, you know, plenty of more days for things to go downhill. I'm sure I will find a lot more stinkers, so stay tuned. But if you're looking for something that's a good, fun horror watch for, you know, an afternoon or for getting together with friends, I think VHS Beyond is a really good option. And I would love to know what you think, if you've seen this movie, if you plan to watch it, what you think about this or anything else that I've talked about on the other videos. Feel free to leave a comment. And I'm hoping that I will be able to post one of these every day for the month of October. And have a great day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.